All right, welcome everybody to the inaugural panel discussion for Project Xtopia, which is a meeting of the minds between sci-fi creators who are helping us imagine possible futures and business leaders on the cutting edge of technology and artificial intelligence. This idea, of course, came from Frank Casale. Today, we're talking about the question of techno-optimism. You know, the future is often very friendly from the perspective of business and very pessimistic from the sci-fi futurist. And how do we bridge that gap? I'm sci-fi filmmaker Cameron Kidd, and on today's panel, we are honored to have multiple Nebula World Fantasy Award and UG Award nominated author and coder Matt Kressel, who goes by Matt. We're going to be discussing his short story, Your Future is Pending, which I think you said is being released in audio format soon. Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah, Kaleidocast podcast next week.
Awesome. So perfect timing. We also have Frank Yu and Neil Redding here to speak about modern AI technology. The format of the panel is as follows. We're going to have a brief introduction of the idea from conflicted futurist and man about town, Frank Casale, and then brief introductions from each of us. Then we're going to talk a little bit, me and Julia are going to interview Matt about his short story from a sci-fi perspective. And after that, we're going to open it up to a panel about whether or not we want a techno-optimistic future and how we get there when it comes to storytelling. So without further ado, Frank, introduce this idea for us.
No, super. Thank you so much. And, you know, you talk about an idea.
Oh, you got to move your hand. I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay. How about that?
Go.
Am I okay? All righty. Take two, as they
Jeff.
say in Hollywood. No, thank you so much. And listen, we all have plenty of ideas, but it's in the execution. And Cameron, I wanted to thank you for really taking the lead on this and making this all happen. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out. I think it will play out real well, and then we could do it again and hopefully entertain and provide some infotainment for those. But the genesis of this really is from several conversations I've had over the past year with people within our network. And I think the reason behind that is that the gap between science fiction and science seems to be shrinking, if you will. And the gap between people that may even be interested in science fiction future, things along those lines. More and more people within our network are interested in science fiction, if you will. So based on prodding and several suggestions within our network, it was suggested, hey, Frank, what if you get a couple of science fiction people in the room, get a couple of technologists, one or two futurists, and see what happens. And here we are. So this should be a wonderful experiment. Thank you all, and I'll pass it back to you. Thank you, Cameron.
So I think we should start with Neil, and then we'll go backwards from, so Neil, introduce yourself. Tell us just a little bit about you.
Sure thing. So I'm a near futurist, which really means that instead of doing sort of deeper future prognostication, like kind of traditional futurists and foresight practitioners often do, I'm fundamentally a technologist. And so I'm really interested in what's emerging as possible today and in the very near future that can be translated into immediate and practical value, right? For people, for brands, for businesses, and so on. So that's the work that I do. I've been doing software engineering and then project leadership and then digital physical convergence kind of work for quite a while. Awesome. So I'll stop there.
Great. Frank.
Hi, I'm the other Frank. And I kind of describe myself as that I used to work in intelligence. Now I'm creating intelligence, which means that in a previous life, I was a military intelligence officer, but now I actually work with AI agents. And so I'm actually the anti-Neil because I'm a little bit more darker vision than utopian in the future. But that's okay though, because I'm ex-military and ex-Microsoft, so that makes a really good combo. But underneath that darkness, there's a little bit of optimism as well. So thank you.
But if you had to pick a side, you're on the side of the darkness. Is that correct?
I think the darkness is coming, but I think we'll overcome eventually with a lot of challenges. Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
you guys just assumed. No, I was going to interject because you assumed that I'm this techno-optimist, and perhaps I come across this way. Perhaps you are looking at my sort of circular background here. It feels very. It's meant to connote this kind of convergence of natural ecosystems and other kinds of ecosystems. But yeah, I mean, we'll get into it, right? I don't know if you put it to me, Cameron, optimist, pessimist. I think there's more nuance there. So
But you have to choose.
I have to choose. I'm going to lean towards optimism because I
Yeah.
feel like, what the stories that we tell create the future that we live into. Like, I mean, we know that. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we're seeing sci-fi actually be fulfilled with our
Exactly.
technology, right? So let's tell good stories that we want to live into.
Amen.
So I'll go next since we're going kind of from the midpoint between business, technology, and storytelling. I completely agree, Neil. The stories we tell do have a huge impact on what we actually do, what we build, what we believe as a society. And often what most people understand about things like AI come from movies. I'm a feminist sci-fi filmmaker and I have a sci-fi podcast, but I also run a documentary company called Yo-Yos that focuses on cutting edge technology and things like AI and kind of making those more accessible to the public. I'm definitely a techno-optimist, and I'm always searching for the books, stories, and movies that are presenting a solar punk or positive future out there. Really, nothing has come close to Star Trek in terms of films or TV, but books like Becky Chambers, they're kind of few and far between. And Julia and I made a film, which she'll talk about in a minute, that even though it takes place in a positive future world, was still pretty dark, right? It's kind of hard to make a story in the future that doesn't have that darkness. So that's where I stand. Julia, introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Reingold. I am a advertising brand strategist and content creator with 15 years of experience. I'm also an illustrator, a writer, and a filmmaker. Cameron and I co-founded a production company called Sailor Uterus, which is the gorgeous logo behind her, where we address what she was talking about, this burnout of the storytelling burnout of pessimism, of a negative future, of like the decline of technology and humanity along with it, and sort of explore points of view that haven't been seen in sci-fi before. So that would be feminist sci-fi, queer sci-fi, solar punk storytelling. But I think all sci-fi storytelling is beautiful. So I'm so excited to talk to all of you. Matt, as an advertising veteran, your depiction of behavioral targeting and capitalism was, keep me chills.
That's perfect introduction. Matt, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm a writer and software developer. I've had 3 Nebula Award nominations, a World Fantasy Award nomination, and a Eugene Foster Award nomination. I write software for a living for big companies. I'm the creator of the Moksha submission system. So if you're a writer and you've ever submitted a short story to one of the big genre markets, you probably use Moksha. And I co-host the Fantastic Fiction at KGB Reading Series in New York City with Ellen Datlow. So if you're ever in New York City, come check us out. And we also have a podcast.
Awesome. So we're going to get started talking about your short story, The Future is Pending. Can you give us a little summary? We're not going to give away the ending because we want people to go find it and read it. But Matt, can you give us a really short summary of what this story is about?
Sure. The story is about this woman, Martha, who lives with her father, who has dementia, and she takes care of him. And her daily job is to basically repair machines that take care of people. So these people are sort of plugged into a virtual reality that immerses their senses in this world, and they spend sometimes days or even weeks in this reality. So in order to live and survive, they basically pay for machines to take care of their bodies while they're in this virtual world. And Martha is one of these technicians who takes care of the machines, which take care of the people. And it's about her struggles to survive, basically in this world. And yeah, there's more to it, but that's the setup.
And if you want to read it, you can order the Clarkesworld magazine issue 158, correct? To find it.
Yeah, it's also available online. If you just Google "Your Future is Pending" at Clarkesworld magazine, you can read it. There's an audio podcast there, and the KaleidoCast podcast is doing a new version of the audio, which I have not heard yet, but I'm excited about.
That's pretty cool. So yeah, Matt, the concept of people being enmeshed or mesh mesh life is kind of similar to the Ready Player One idea of, people living in a virtual world, but the plot is much darker, more of Neil Stevenson or like Matt Adam, Margaret Atwood. So I just want to ask, what got you started? What was the inception point for this story for you?
So it's partly based on a true story. A relative of mine was having a rat problem in their backyard, and so they hired someone to come in and deal with it, and they put rat poison, and the neighbor's dog ate a rat and died. And like I was just horrified by that because like growing up with my own dog and falling in love, and I just love animals, and it was just like this horrifying thing. And it was just like it was that. And then also one of the things that the story's about is sort of these levels of bureaucracy of these systems, especially automated systems. And a few years ago, I was struggling with a health issue and had to deal with the healthcare system and going through like the various levels of insurance companies that, oh, you need to call this number and that number. And over again, I would get, well, my system says, and I said, well, what does that mean? Like no one really was analyzing that when people said, I'm like, somebody programmed that system, right? So but we're not really analyzing or thinking about that. So those were kind of the impetus for the story.
Great. Yeah, that is a question I often will, when I talk to friends, they think that often sometimes algorithms are born out of nothing and that they're fair inherently. And they are often actually, I don't know, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but it's not always true because they have to be programmed by somebody based on some sets of data that are chosen by humans. So there's always going to be some form of bias. But Julia, I'd love, you had some questions for him. Jump in.
Yeah. I think some of them were already answered. And I really also, as a chronically ill person, I also really respect that the first target in the story was the healthcare system and the taking care of the most vulnerable in any given society. But I think I'm really curious to hear about the narrative choices you made. When I was reading the story, at no point did I think that AI specifically was the villain of the story, that AI as an entity, it was never us versus AI. I always for a while, I thought, okay, so it's the abuse of AI, it's the misuse of AI, it's the way capitalism takes AI and uses it to squeeze the life out of people. But then Cameron, to your point, it was like, but people made AI. So like, what's that space in between? Like the use of AI is an AI, like there's something in between the abuse of AI and the AI itself that I think is really interesting. That I imagine Frank and you guys both probably have a lot of experience with. And maybe it's not as simple as saying like, well, AI is not the villain, the abuse of AI is the villain. Maybe it's something more complicated than that. I'm curious to know your thoughts on if that was the intent, or if you ever gave any thought to that provocation as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So one of my I guess favorite philosophers or about AI is Jaron Lanier. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, Lanier. And he was one of the originators of VR, and now he's like talks a lot about AI. And he basically says it's a mistake to give AI agency. At the end of the day, they're all programmed by humans, and you should think of them as collaborators and not like that you're collaborating with other humans.
Right.
So when you go to ChatGPT is not the agent, it's the 100,000 humans that ChatGPT scraped off the internet that you're collaborating with. So that's a better way to think of it. So like specifically in this story, I wasn't thinking of AI as the evil, AI from Terminator, like Skynet, that it developed sentience and is doing this horrible thing. I'm thinking of like there was a decision that a human being made at some point to use this system. And I think that oftentimes when we do that, there are gaps. There's huge gaps that we're missing, huge swaths of people that we may forget about or fall by the wayside because they don't fit into these exact, holes or shapes that we've created in the system. And so I think that's really what I was going for. The sentient AI trope has been done a lot, and I actually don't find that as interesting as like when you have like the humans and who
Yeah.
program the system. Yeah.
They're basically the tools of late stage capitalism. I really liked how Martha was followed by the ads, right? There's a moment,
Mhm.
there's a line where you write that one of the people who she had Googled, researched, was showing up on a sleeping woman's smartwatch near her face, right? Like that's a tool, right? The AI is targeting her based on biometric data, but for the purpose of selling goods. Now, when you talk about agency, I think actually it's now a good time to open it up. Let's talk about the story with our two technologists here. I mean, Frank, you work with agents. What's the
That's
line
correct.
between agency directed by humans and the point at which these AI agents or forms will have their own decision making?
So the analogy that I always use is in the movie The Terminator. Skynet is an LLM. The Terminator and the hunter-killer drones are agents. And Matt is correct. The LLM really, at this point, doesn't have agency. In other words, it can't do things. It can't even collect things. It has to be fed information. But the agents can. And the agents themselves are like miniature LLMs that connect to the LLM. And they grow and they evolve. And they can also rewrite their own code, and they can rewrite the LLM. So they are far more dangerous than the LLM itself. That said, I think that when Matt discussed that in an algorithmic world, I totally agree that things are coded by human beings. Like I did AI for games when I was at Microsoft and Xbox, and a human being had to look at all the different outcomes and all the different decision trees when they created our AI. That's old AI. We're up to like maybe third or fourth generation AI. The AI that's going to be developed by OpenAI and Anthropic and Google are based on something called hybrid reinforced learning with transformer models, which means there's not going to be humans coding it. It'll be basically running a model through a metaverse or a simulation, unsupervised learning, and they'll just learn themselves. Because even ChatGPT has not a lot of lines of code. It's just a lot of data and lots of nodes. So the next generation of LLMs and AI won't be coded by human beings, and that's the danger. But they'll learn 10 times faster than they are now.
Woo.
Yeah, that's where the fear comes from. I guess that's where the stories that scare me come from, but they're the ones that maybe aren't as interesting to Matt, right? It's been done a lot, but that's where a lot of the fear comes from for me, right? Google's Deep Blue beat the world's best Go player but there were months and tens, dozens of people really supervising that AI. But you're talking about in a future, there's an AI that could be spun up by another algorithm that learns how to play Go without any humans being involved to tell it anything about it.
Yeah, it's not the future. It's now. It's
right now.
It's in the labs right now. Yes.
Cool.
I should add that's definitely like a concern of mine, and I think there's interesting stories there. But I think that what I'm saying is that there was a human decision to build an AI that can program itself. So that's
true.
kind of
That's
questions that I want to ask.
Good point.
I mean, I feel like one of the tired but really fascinating conversations about AI is like, if you give it the ability to program itself, you're essentially giving it agency over its own life. You're giving it consciousness. And at that point, we're starting conversations about parenting. We're starting conversations about just, I mean, they're starting their own families. This is like the same way that all this coding goes into the creation of AI. That's genetics. So I guess part of what I'm realizing is like, do the people who are responsible for this, is that what they're thinking? Is this all for like, is this more like an engineer's game where it's iterative and it's for the sake of science? Or is there conscious thought about like, well, we're rearing a family here. What values are we instilling in these algorithms?
I think that's a good question. I mean, but I think we have at least one of the people responsible for this, Frank, you in the room, right? I mean,
Yeah,
like you
Frank.
said, you're creating technology.
Sorry.
I mean, I don't mean to. Well, I'm not to point the finger, but I'm saying, just like you said, no, this is not the future. This is now. It's like people are doing this, and some of them are in the room here, right? And I mean, I could add my own perspective, but I'm curious to hear, like, Julia's question, how you would respond to that, Frank.
Oh, is this directed towards me?
Yeah, well, I'm just,
Okay.
I mean, I was just sort of like what do you call it? Like a layup, of taking the ball and, like, from Julia and like putting it to you, because I'm curious, right? Because look, there is a kind of responsibility. I love the parent metaphor.
Yeah.
I guess since I'm speaking, I'll add one other thing, right? There's been a lot of conversation of the past year, especially about, how the developers of these large language models often don't know, by their own admission, right, how they're arriving at the output or the conclusions that they're arriving at, right? There's a sense that we don't fully know. And I heard a conversation recently, I'm forgetting who said this, but it was really useful as a metaphor. You know, like for a long time, humans didn't understand. I mean, we had stories, right? But we could say we didn't understand natural phenomena. Like, why do animals behave the way they do? Why does the weather do what it does, right? Why does nature do what it does broadly? And so we developed natural science, right? I mean, which is a systematic way, again, many other stories, religions and so on, but like science is a systematic way of like examining what entities, what things do, the behaviors and the outcomes, and then developing a model, an understanding of it. And that's what we're going to have to do with AIs as well, right? They've exceeded our ability to determine all of their outcomes. But like Julia said, just like our children do, right? I mean, any of us who are parents, myself included, have certainly felt at times like, thankfully, our daughter hasn't done anything like really crazy or dangerous or disruptive
no domestic terrorism, no
to other people. But yeah, I mean, you see these conversations that you know, media or journalists will have with the parents of serial killers or you know, mass gun shooting perpetrators, and just like, did you expect this? There's a sense of responsibility, right? Is what you're saying. But like, but there's also not control from parent to child, right? So yeah.
So thank you for the context. So in answering Julie's question, right now we are treating AI like children. We're giving them basically reinforcement learning through this is good, this is bad. No, this is good, this is bad. But what's going to happen is that we're moving on to a different phase. Like I said, we're almost at the fourth generation of AI now. And what that means is that we will have less of a role in sort of the training chain of AI. And we are hoping, and there's three things that are going on in the world of AI. One is, you know, we know that after a while, once we have really smart AI, they'll be able to sort of just find ways to get around these things. So we're kind of wondering, like, we should just build in alignment. Instead of putting guide rails on them, we should actually teach cognitively the AI of what's right or wrong, which is a reflection of us. What is our moral right or wrong as well? The second thing that's going on is something called the Moloch problem. And the Moloch problem is that all the tech companies are rushing headlong with their new models because no one wants to slow down, because if they slow down, they're no longer competitive, or, you know, everyone will catch up. So that means we're all hurtling into the future rapidly with probably much more advanced AI that we probably don't know how to control. And the third thing is, as the world becomes more uncertain, we are going to give more agency to AI to be not part of the kill chain. In other words, autonomous weapons, and I'm not just talking about drones, but with cyber warfare, the context, I'm in cybersecurity, so I'm looking at the roadmap of what's going on. Everything can be turned into a weapon. Your heating system, your Tesla, your lighting system, your grid. Once that's controlled by not so much an AI, but humans using AI as tools, there's no defense against that except maybe other AI done by sort of defensive AI. So I would say, yeah, it is a problem. And everyone is rushing to sort of find a solution to these three incidences of what's happening. But I really believe that as AI gets more advanced, I mean, AI is not good or bad. It's a reflection of us. And, you know, like many of us, some are good, some are bad, some are psychotic, some are altruistic. And you'll find that the AIs will develop their own sort of personalities as they become more advanced as well. And I think it's our responsibility to give them that alignment of, you know, how do we give them a sense of morality without giving them guide rails? Because right now, the tech companies all have guide rails. But if you look into the subconscious of their AIs, there's some really dark stuff in there, especially if you use Mid-Journey or the visualizers.
Yeah.
So alignment through structures is really what we need to do.
Frank, I'd love to go into that, where you've had these AIs create their own images. Can you your camera got turned somehow or something's
off with it? Am I upside down?
Yeah, it was sideways. So this actually leads us back, I think, in a really interesting way to the story, where we want to talk about like, how do we give some kind of morality to the algorithms that we're creating and supervising, but also at the end of the day, when it comes to a lot of the fear of how they'll be used. It's still a human at the wheel weaponizing these tools. And since Matt, we did actually talk about a little bit of the ending of the story. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with this story, The Future is Pending, is that in the beginning, Martha's job is to be a warm body to go fix a bot whose job is to take care of someone who lives enmeshed in a virtual reality world, like essentially the way that we take care of coma patients, right? Moving their legs and washing their body. And her job was just to put in a, what was it, network card or something different, right? And while she's doing that, she sees a glitch in the algorithm that could be deadly, that could result in lots of people dying, and sees that, right? So there's this like opportunity for a human to weaponize an algorithm. And I guess I just wanted to ask you guys about that. Is one of our biggest our current fears. I think the point of having stories like this is similar to Black Mirror, right, Matt? Like, we want to be able to think about it before it happens. Yeah. Obviously, there's already been attacks on things like power plants. So anyone who wants to speak to that?
Yeah, I just want to like jump off of what Frank said, and thank you, Frank, for those comments. I think those are great. So like when I think of AI, I think of it as a technology, as a tool, and then you look at the history of tool creation in humanity, and it's always to solve a problem, right? We invented a hammer because it was, we needed something to bang the nail in. We invented the gasoline powered farm tool because it's much more efficient than doing it by hand. And then it's like AI, like you mentioned that there's this like rapid development of this stuff, and everybody's trying to beat everybody else because they don't want to be left behind, but there's no conscious thought of where we're going with that, or at least if it's an afterthought almost. And I feel like that's one of the primary jobs of science fiction, is to envision, those potential futures and what we can do, what are the dangers of that future. And, I want to say, like, yeah, this story is really dark and bleak. Not all my stories are like that. I have some of my stories are very optimistic, but I think that, I follow my id a lot of times. And here, this is a fear for me, like, like, why was some of the first iterations of AI that got public, why were they visual art and like creative writing? I'm not sure if you're familiar with what happened with Clark's World magazine, where they got inundated with AI generated submissions. And the answer was like, well, it's just because that, like, artists want their work to be seen or read, and so they're the ones like freely sharing this stuff online. Like if lawyers had all their like case documents online, or doctors had all their medical reports online, but artists didn't, I think that's where the AI would have come out with first, because they would have all the data to train on. So it's just like it's like it's very opportunist, it's very capitalistic, and like I don't love capitalism, but I think it's the best system that we have at the time, right now. But so I guess what I'm saying is, like, we're headed, like, the people working very, very hard to develop these AIs, to make them smarter, to make them self-training, all this stuff. How many of them are saying, well, what is this for? Like, what is this for? Why do we need this? What problem is AI solving that we are currently not solving? Now, if you want to come back and say, well, in the medical industry, we can have, an AI look at someone's scan and be a better doctor. Great, I'm all for that. Or some, AI read a bunch of, 10,000 legal briefs and say, well, here's a case that you didn't consider that might be relevant to this. But like, just building this super smart thing to see where it goes without really considering it, that to me is terrifying. And I don't know what you all.
So let me just bring point. So Matt, I totally agree with you. And one of the things I liked about your story is that, there is no like monster or really a villain in your story, but it's really about the depersonalization of people's existences because of AI. And I'm from the games industry as well, and I'm a little conflicted about that, because I like games and it makes people happy, but it also makes people sort of disconnected from real people and society itself when they go down that deep hole. And I think that AI's biggest danger, at least in the immediate term, is not existential crisis or things like that. I think it's we're going to go into our own little bubbles. And as the AI is basically trying to please us, I mean, like one of the most popular custom GPTs on OpenAI are companions, like companions that people talk to. And the problem they're trying to solve is loneliness. When we talk about AI, we think about productivity, we think about like generative creativity. But the reality is, I think that people will use the AI as companions for all the things they can't get from a human being, and it'll further isolate them from the real world. And as we have metaverses and spatial computing, people will just escape into the mesh, as you say, and that to them, they may be very happy, but that's the existence they want to be. So I think that's the world we're going into. And I can guarantee you within 2 to 3 years, we'll have AI religions. I mean, religions will be set up around AI. You already have AI influencers. It's only a matter of time until someone starts worshiping like some of these AI models as deities. And I don't think that's far-fetched.
Which was predicted in science fiction stories. I'm trying to remember, God, which one was it? Was it an Asimov story where they, or maybe it was, maybe
I
it
have
was,
no mouth, but I have to scream, that one.
well, that
Well,
I hope they weren't worshiping. That was like a demon. That's such a good story.
I'm trying to remember the story and I'm blanking on it, but it was they would worship. They knew everyone knew it was an AI. They knew it would, but they would go and worship it as a god. God, I wish I could remember it now. I'll come up with it after, and then I'll Google it after.
There's a modern book called Archive Undying about a future where there's like giant kind of mech controlled robots, but there are multiple artificial intelligences that kind of control whole regions and are worshipped and are kind of super powerful. But there's always this need for, I think it's interesting you say that the AI is trying to please us, right? A lot of what I see when it comes to the business world is similar to what Matt said. A lot of the current use cases are hard to argue with, like, oh, this is going to improve chances of catching breast cancer, right? There's a lot of uses of things like data processing that are just going to be helpful. And the question, back to Matt's point, is, are we developing things just to see how they work and see where they fit in the market, as opposed to developing them specifically to solve a problem? I wonder if Mesh was created to solve a problem or created to sell a product, right? Like what was the problem of loneliness, perhaps the problem of isolation, but at the end of the day in your story, it only creates more isolation as less people are present for the world that's crumbling and kind of retreat into a world that's fictional. We worry about that today, don't we, Julia?
We do. I feel like it's the kind of situation where the reward for winning the pie eating contest is more pie. I think if we learn that AI can do something, like there's no finishing, there's no bottom to that well. But I've been, everything that you guys have said has been so interesting, but I'm really curious if AI is going to become self-taught, how important do you all think more optimistic stories about AI are? If like about creating more stories and more environments where AI can learn, oh, this is what a solar punk world looks like. This is where I'm a better collaborator and I'm respected and maybe not revered as a god, but like maybe treated as a friend. How important are the existence of stories like that in the coming years?
So this is what I call the all summers in a day problem. If you're familiar with that Ray Bradbury story, there's a bunch of students living on Venus and they've never ever seen the sun because it rains all the time. But there's this young woman, I think her name's Margot, who is from Earth, and she remembers the sun. And she's like, no, the sun's out. And they're like, what are you talking about, you silly girl? There's no such thing as the sun. And they make fun of her and they lock her in a closet. And what do you know? For the first time in 7 years, the sun comes out and the kids see the sun and they play in the sun and they forget all about Margot who's locked in the closet. So
Yes.
it's a really haunting story. And so the way I see it is this: like if the weatherman is saying today's rain, tomorrow's rain, the next day's rain, and every time you ask what the weather is, all you get is rain, you're not going to expect the sun to come out, right? You're just be like, well, that's the way it is. It's just always rains. And I think that the danger is when the media, the most of the media that talks about the future is bleak and dark. You expect that. Now you're not going to expect anything different. So I think that the importance of having optimistic stories or alternate versions of the future that aren't dark allows us to psychologically, sociologically consider a future that isn't dark. And I think that's super important, not just for us, but for the AIs that we're training. And to see that, other alternatives are possible, and to sort of, like I could say, well, where are my flying cars, or where is my free healthcare, or like where is, like why don't we have these positive things? Because if you don't expect them, then you're not going to get angry when you don't get them.
I think to Cameron's point, Cameron, you mentioned Star Trek, right? Which, I mean, I'm not a Trekkie. My life partner, my wife is, yeah, I can do this too. Yes, let's live long and prosper, Julia. I mean, but seriously, and Star Trek Discovery particularly, right? I mean, people have had issues with it, I think largely because it's just so much more diverse and female driven and all this. But like also at some point in season 3, maybe they went through a wormhole to like 900 years in the future, and there's programmable matter that spaceships are made out of, and there's just all kinds of really amazing tech. And also to your point, I mean, sometimes it gets dark. I mean, humans still haven't evolved beyond our instinct to fight each other, right? For one thing, or humans and other kinds of creatures. But yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying, Matt, about the need to have these positive stories, because we've agreed that we kind of live into the stories that we create. I'm definitely torn personally, because I also hear the point that, like with Black Mirror, like with this story, I mean, there's a value to a cautionary tale, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I struggle with this often, to be honest. Like my wife is much more optimistic and a positive than I am, and I tend to feel like, well, it's like expect the best, plan for the worst or something, but I don't think it exactly works that way, right? That's a colloquialism, that's a sort of truism, but it's like often we sort of hope for the best, expect the worst, and it's sort of like plan for the worst. But I mean, one other thing I wanted to throw into the mix here in terms of the conversation is, and when I say I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic, I mean, and I hear you, Matt, your point about tool creation, right? We see a problem, we create something to solve that problem. I think that's a lot of what we do. But I also feel like we create things just because we can. Sometimes we just stumble into them, right? Like I'm thinking about the scene in 2001, The Space Odyssey, where the ape first discovers, and the way Kubrick shoots it and screenwrites it and directs it, it's like this ape is just playing with bones that it finds in the ground. And it's just like, takes the bone, sort of sloppily bats it around, and then eventually through that discovery process, muscular like playing with it, it realizes, I can slam things, I can break things, I can attack people. Sorry for moving away from my mic, but like, right. So it's just this kind of discovery process that happens through interacting with the world, like human babies, right? Do they have this like conceptual model where they're like, okay, here's the problem, I can't stand, I'm going to figure out how to stand? Like it's not like that. They just sort of do it, right? And I think that humans are going to do and create and build everything that we can do and create and build.
I agree with that.
So it's kind of like, I mean, I feel like AI and AIs with agency and AIs that create other programs, I mean, and rewrite their own code and evolve. I mean, I take it for granted this is happening. And this is why I just really like to think about, this ecosystem model of like, we live inside these nested, overlapping ecosystems of many different kinds of participants, right? Humans and other living creatures and AIs and software and physical spaces. And like, this is kind of the mental model that I apply to the technology work that I do, like the system design work that I do. So anyway, a few different ideas to kind of.
I just have a thought. So like you're saying this idea of like a child just plays and that metaphor is similar to perhaps what these creators of these AI models are doing, is they're just creating for the sake of creating. It's interesting though, because I feel like art is like a specifically human thing, right? And then creativity, like literature, painting, what have you. And it just seems interesting to me, and I'm wondering if you all could comment on this, is like, why are we so ready to hand over that skill to a machine? Why are we so eager to give that thing that makes us uniquely human, our ability to communicate, for example, our ability to express ourselves via language, our ability to express ourselves via art? Why are we so willing to have a machine do that for us? It seems to me that that's taking away the very thing that makes us human.
I think
We aren't. Go ahead, Julia.
Okay.
A lot of people aren't.
First of all, Matt, I think it's a beautiful question. And second of all, like I don't know if I agree. I think art and creativity can come from anything and anywhere. Like, I mean, you look at these beautiful images or videos of like monkeys at the zoo getting finger paints and just going absolutely nuts. Like, I think creativity isn't, we don't get to decide where creativity comes from. It just does, it happens. And so when I use like Midjourney and these AI generated images that are more or less and like accumulation of all the art that's ever existed before in the past, that's what artists do. Like, I mean, there are certainly a few geniuses who come out of the clear blue sky and just like slap something on a canvas you've never seen before. But for the most part, we're growing up looking at the artists that we love the most and making art that more or less reflects and bows to them. So I think as for like why we did this, like as to why we gave like a paintbrush and a canvas to AI, I think I know it's so corny to keep going back to the parenting thing, but I think because it's one of the best ways to see what AI can do. I think like the measure of creativity and how inventive something can be is a great barometer for how complex it is. So I don't think that that's going to stop anytime soon. I think people are really intimidated by this. So I think subconsciously, maybe they understand like, oh, this is legit. But I don't know. I think I'm also really curious to hear more, Matt, about why you do see this distinction in line between, like, well, a human made this art, so I recognize it as real art, versus an AI made this art. So that was a fun hobby for a while.
I think there's definitely a generational thing with it. I think younger people growing up with it are not going to have an issue with it. You know, I'm Gen X, and you know, I grew up with computers, but you know, I was programming since I was 9. But it feels qualitatively different than anything that's come before. You know, for me, it's a little bit of an existential threat in the idea that I create, you know, I work very hard to write these stories, and you know, at some point maybe a machine will be able to spit something out as good, if not better, in seconds. That's like, oh, okay, yeah. The other thing is also just in terms of, I don't think we really spoke on this, it's just like the training data, right? So there's a lot of questions on where they're getting the data from. Obviously, we've seen with, I think it was Stable Diffusion, where like they were generating a soccer player and it had the Getty image copyright on the generation. So it was very clearly scraping copyrighted stuff. And we're seeing this issue with fiction too. I know there's some lawsuits going through the courts now, like Sarah Silverman and some Richard Kadri, who's an author, Paul Tremblay. There's a class action suit because they said the AI used their stuff without permission. So the thing is this, like, you know, I go to watch a YouTube video, and at the beginning there's a 30-second Grammarly commercial, and this young woman says, oh, you know, I get really anxious writing college essays, and now I have this new Grammarly tool that's going to help me with it. And I think there's a danger there because what happens is, like what I said earlier, like what makes us uniquely human is our ability to communicate. Now, you could say that other animals can communicate, but not to the same degree that humans can. And I think that there's a real risk there when we decide that we don't want to develop our communication skills, our language, our writing, or oral skills, and we rather have a machine do it for us. I think that there's a real risk there in that we're going to lose our ability to communicate.
We are going off on a rabbit hole that's a whole nother conversation that we should be doing. Like this is a second Project Xtopia conversation. Is so
me going off on a tangent?
No, but like I think we all unheard of. I will say, I'll try and summarize what we've discussed so far, in that to your point, Matt, a good phrase I've heard is why would I take the time to read something that somebody couldn't be bothered to write, right? So I think there is going to be a market response to this kind of, I think the market will have a say in like what is acceptable and what is interesting. I personally had noticed that on like websites like Tumblr, like AI generated art isn't as exciting for people. But I appreciate and I like Julia's approach about, tools, right? These are still tools and it's creativity. And to Neil's point, we are playing with these bones. I think the reason why we're coming back to the idea of like the importance of sci-fi and how and what kind of stories we're telling, when we're playing with bones, these are bones that could potentially kill people, right? Which is something we've never done before that could have unintended consequences. So we need stories that tell us things like, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Stuart Russell's Human Compatible. He said a good example of what we want in an AI would be something like an oracle where we could ask it a question. But if we don't have these thought experiments about what that could look like on the back end, we might not know what to look for when we're coding them. I personally think we need like international regulation. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But he talked about one thing that could happen is we ask the oracle, like in super intelligent oracle, how do we solve cancer? And the next day, every human on Earth wakes up with cancer. And the machine says, well, I needed to run a bunch of tests. So like, things that we don't think about. We might need these kind of darker stories as guideposts to figure out what we don't want. But we also, I think all can agree that we need stories that show a positive world where there's still interest and plot as something to look forward to. And as Matt said, to give us something to expect.
Yeah, just to sort of say something about, so maybe I'm a crypto optimist, even though I'm more team dystopian. But if you ever see the movie Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey, you'll notice that one of the subplot points of that is his relationship with his co-pilot TARS, the robot.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, he's very negative towards it. In fact, but you'll see by the end of the movie, he treats it like family, and it doesn't replace like his children, but he sees that a relationship existing with a robotic AI is possible. And I don't think it's out of the question that, we will have a very different relationship with machines and devices in the future, but it could be negative, it could be positive. I think that like everything else, there's a certain level of, a comfortable space where it's too extreme or it's ineffectual. But I think we need to sort of understand ourselves as well as like, like the number one AI company in the world by revenue is ByteDance, which runs TikTok and Douyin, and it's essentially an AI company. But that's what's going to happen everywhere. I mean, AI is already around us. We just haven't had generative AI and ChatGPT for more than like 12 months now, 13 months, I believe. So, but AI is already embedded in our lives, but we just don't see it. Now that we see it, we're a little bit more hesitant about it. But yeah, I agree there are dangers, but they're just dangerous to living, right?
I love that, Frank. And I always look for that character too in my favorite sci-fi stories. Like it's in Rogue One, it's in Cameron and I's favorite Scavenger's Reign. Like there's always like
Scavenger's Reign, so good.
Oh, it's so good.
So
but
good.
There's always like a bot or an AI character who's like low-key being abused, like in the background. He's flying this shit. Like he's getting talked at and not to. And then eventually, at least towards the end of the story, you're like, oh, this is the only character who has any sense. Like this is the character who's been keeping everyone alive. And I think like the techno-optimist in me is like, that's what I want. That's the future I want. Like, like I don't want to worship them as gods, but I do, like the same way that you have children, I do think like your hope is that like they're the best versions of you. Your hope is that like you put the best versions of you into something that moves forward. So like I agree with you, Frank. I think like in my heart, like that's what I want. Like I want a friend who flies my spaceship.
Even more than that.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, as opposed to someone who denies you elder care for your dad, because it didn't make financial sense, right?
Yeah, and then kills your dogs because
I think the problem is human society. It's not the tools, it's the humans and the way we set up society that has the impact, right? The late stage capitalism's implementation of the tools is what's dark. It's our societal setup, whereas these futures that are more open and different in terms of how the society is made up and how the humans act is where I think the robots and algorithms are more friendly. So maybe we just change our whole society structure first.
That's it.
Go ahead, Neil. We got to wrap up in just a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna add that I'm skeptical about what makes humans unique, if anything does. I don't know. I always chafe, when I hear like other creatures don't use language, and I hear you, Matt. Like it's clear that there's maybe different levels of sophistication of language, right? But we know that certain creatures do use some kinds of language. I mean, like dolphins and whales have been shown to have like vocabularies of sometimes many dozens or even hundreds of words. You know, it's just as far as we can tell. We don't know. But I mean, to tie together a couple points here, I feel like the discovery process of, you know, just like McLuhan said, you know, we shape our tools and our tools shape us, right? I think in shaping us, these tools will hold up a mirror, not always a black mirror, hopefully, but sometimes like a bright mirror, a happy mirror, you know, to help us discover more about how to be better at what we do value about our own humanness, you know? I think there's a real opportunity for that, you know? So I don't know.
I think that's a
I
good
don't even
place
feel
to
like
wrap
that's
up.
optimistic. I feel like it's just like,
No,
you know, just like when you hold a mirror up to people, like you get to see, like, is this how I want to look? Is this how I want to be? And I think that's what's
Agreed.
happening.
Yeah. Well, this has been an incredibly stimulating discussion. I will end by letting everyone go around the room and plug anything they have that's upcoming that they think people should know about, or anywhere they can find more about them on the internet. So let's go in the same order that we introduced ourselves. Neil, what's going on for you, and where can we find more about you?
If you're going to South by Southwest, come see my talk on Sunday. It's called Co-Creating the Near Future with Spatial Computing and AI.
Cool.
I'm going to be planning to deliver that talk more places. If you know of any stages I can be on or virtual like context, I can deliver it in the coming weeks or months. Let me know, and I want to definitely be in touch with all of you. Frank's the only one I already know at all prior to this, so this is great. New friends, new collaborators, and yeah, LinkedIn is great. Honestly, neilredding.com though is kind of my speaker and thought leadership site, so you can see some writing about ecosystem paradigm and other stuff I'm doing, as well as talks there.
Great. And my full name is Frank Yu. I'm a co-founder of a cybersecurity AI agent company called GhostDog, and we're www.ghostdog.io. And you can always reach me at frank@ghostdog.io. But I work with visualizers and all types of AI as well, and games. I like games. So thank you. Great meeting everyone.
Cool. Julia and I have a body horror sci-fi film that's screening at AwesomeCon in DC this Sunday, same day as your talk, Neil. So if anyone is in DC, come see us. It's at 2 p.m. in room 202 at AwesomeCon. And if you want to learn more about me, definitely LinkedIn's a great place to find out what we're doing, what we're up to. And for our films, for Julia and I's production company, I would say go to look up Sailor Uterus on YouTube, and you can see our short films and our content there.
Yeah. You can find out what I'm up to at juliareingold.com. I'm freelancing with all types of tech brands to find brand voices that aren't quite as horrible as what we've been talking about. And for my comics, my sci-fi comics and videos, I'm there too, juliareingold.com for more info.
Yeah, so I'm Matt Kressel. You can find all my links at matthewkressel.net, KRESSEL.net, 2 T's in Matthew. So the story that we spoke about today is available on Clark's World magazine. So if you just search for Your Future is Pending, Clark's World, it should be the first thing that comes up. And there's also going to be a new audio narration of the story coming out with Kaleidocast, so kaleidoscope, but instead of scope, it's cast, C-A-S-T. I believe it's kaleidocast.nyc is the podcast. So you can check that out.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This has
Thank
been
you.
It was
really
a pleasure,
awesome.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.